Hello my children, it is the Comics Kid 2099, and as you can see I am here once again to talk about a little bit more of my collection. And the last time I did one of these I did not get very far at all, and now it is my hope to be able to get through the rest of this shelf in a not ridiculous amount of time. We will see if I can get through this in a reasonable amount of time. Fantastic Four 1, 2, 3, 4. This was part of the Marvel Knights imprint. It was written by Grant Morrison and drawn by Jay Lee. I've accidentally pulled it out. I did not mean to do that. And this story, I did not like it at all. I've come to expect a whole lot from Grant Morrison. He is a writer that I've liked quite a bit of his works, and this was not one of them. So when he does something that is a bit of a stinker, I hold him to higher standards than I would somebody whose work is just okay. And that's true with anyone. If they have a library of fantastic works to their name and then they do something that sucks, I'm going to be far more disappointed than I would be if somebody consistently sucks. The next book, let me see if I can not pull this out, Witches. This has nothing to do with the movie with Jack Nicholson. This is a story with 3 Marvel characters working together. It is, let me see if I can remember them, Satana, Topaz, and I don't remember the third one. So that's them. And they are working for Doctor Strange. This is kind of like Charlie's Angels with a mystical twist. And let me just go ahead and say this is horrible. The only reason I bought it was because it has Doctor Strange in it, and I actually hadn't read it before. This came out in the early 2000s, and I saw this in a bookstore used. I got it, and it was just really bad. If you are a fan of Doctor Strange, I would recommend you don't get it, because he's actually not represented in the best way here. And I don't really know any of these characters very well at all, especially not enough to buy a book featuring them as the main characters. But I didn't know that going in. I thought maybe they would be interesting, and they really weren't. So that was Witches, The Gathering. Next, I've got another Doctor Strange book, Strange, The Doctor is Out. This came out within the last 5 years. This was after Brian Michael Bendis took away his mantle as the Sorcerer Supreme, and this is written by Mark Waid and drawn by Emma Rios. I like Emma Rios' work. She did Doctor Strange Season 1 with Greg Pak, and I like Mark Waid's work. However, having said that, this book was not bad, like Fantastic Four 1, 2, 3, 4, or The Witches, The Gathering, but it wasn't really stellar. It was just kind of there. And that kind of disappointed me, and I don't think, other than Doctor Strange Season 1, I don't think we've had any other Strange stories since this one. So that's a little bit of a bummer, and I don't know what the reception to this was. I don't know if it was, if everyone thought the same that I did, and if they did, that might be why we haven't seen many other Doctor Strange stories, since this one was just kind of there. It wasn't really good, it just wasn't really bad either. It was just mediocre. And then another Doctor Strange book. As you can see, I've got all of them kind of right here in a row, except for Season 1, which is with the hardcovers. This is The Oath, which is probably my favorite Doctor Strange story from the last 15 years. This is really just good. I don't want to say a whole lot about it because I want you guys to go and read it. The cure for cancer shows up here, and I remember Night Nurse is also one of the supporting characters here. I may need to reread it, and then I might do a review of it, because it's been a few years since I've read this, but I do remember liking it at the time, and we'll see if I still like it if I reread it and do a review. This is The Strange Beginnings and Endings, written by J. Michael Straczynski. I don't know right off the top of my head who drew this. Somebody named Barnes. And this book was basically Ultimate Doctor Strange. It's not set in the Ultimate Universe, and the Ultimate Doctor Strange who showed up in Ultimate Spider-Man is actually different than this character, but it is not the same Doctor Strange that is showing up, say, in The Oath or The Doctor is Out. This is a brand new origin story. It takes just one or two broad aspects from the Doctor Strange origin and it kind of redefines them, does them differently for the air quotes 21st century. I didn't like it because I feel like the Doctor Strange origin from Strange Tales 115 is not a bad origin story. I still think 50 years later, it still holds up. I don't think it needs to be reinvented every so often. You compare this to another Steve Ditko character like Spider-Man, you look at Amazing Fantasy 15, there are some aspects of that origin that are a little silly and a little outdated. It's still a very good origin story, but you know, in recent years, you don't see that it's a radioactive spider anymore. Now it's a genetically engineered spider. Things like that, people feel like they need to update these elements of the mythos. I don't feel like anything in Strange's origin needs to be updated. And so I felt like this book suffered because I didn't like that they were trying to fix what wasn't broken. But I do want to reread it again because I've heard other people say that they liked it. And I'm curious if it was just me being very close-minded, considering I really love Doctor Strange, and I didn't like that they were messing with one of my favorite characters. So I'll reread it and try to keep more of an open mind about messing around with the origin. But that was my thoughts on it a couple years ago when I finally got my hands on this. I think I got it as a gift around Christmas time. The last Doctor Strange trade you will see up here, this is an oldie. This is one of my earliest trades I got. I remember I was doing a lot of yard work, and I bought this with the money I got from that. This is Doctor Strange from the early 1970s. See, I didn't even read it that many times, but you can tell the spine is kind of worn. I don't know why it is. I bought it new, but maybe I've read it more than I thought. But I actually have 3 volumes of Essential Doctor Strange, and I know the stories collected in A Separate Reality are collected in one of those volumes of Doctor Strange, Essential Doctor Strange. But I kept this because it has a really fantastic foreword, I believe by Steve Englehart, and I won't spoil it, but if you can get your hands on this, I don't even know if it's in print anymore. If you can get your hands on it, I would suggest buying it. This is some really solid Doctor Strange work, almost at the peak of his popularity. I would say that in the late 60s, early 70s, that's when Doctor Strange was really flourishing, even almost more so than in the 60s when Stan Lee and Steve Ditko were working on a character. Because, you know, in the 70s you have things like The Omen and Rosemary's Baby, you know, more of a rise in occult fiction. And I think because of that, Doctor Strange was more of a popular character. And Steve Englehart, he's pretty great on this book, I think. His whole run was really awesome, and I'm sad that he didn't last as long as he did. He left the book fairly soon after this storyline. He left it for, he was having disagreements with Marvel, which I won't get into. But I really enjoyed this, and the foreword here is just priceless. It details a little bit of the behind-the-scenes work that went on with this story. Marvel Knights 2099. Sorry, I just shook the camera a little bit. This is a series of one-shots written by Robert Kirkman. And if you can't tell by my YouTube name, I am a fan of the original 2099 universe. And probably if I went back and read those books now, I would have a considerably different opinion on them. But when I was younger, you know, 13 and 14, I really liked the 2099 comics. And this is not set in the original 2099 books. I haven't been showing the covers. I apologize. That's Daredevil from this book. This is a reboot, if you will. The 2099 books ended in the mid-90s, and then there have been a couple of relaunches of the 2099 books. This is one of them, and there was a mini-series just a few years ago called Time Storm 2099, which I have, but I haven't read it since it came out. I have it somewhere else. And they haven't returned to the 2099 universe since those comics ended in the 90s. And that kind of disappoints me, but I feel like we're just going to keep getting things like this, where it's a brand new universe with the name 2099, but not anything resembling the old 2099 comics. And this one in particular, like I said, it's a series of one-shots. We've got back here, it says Daredevil, Black Panther, Inhumans, Punisher, and Mutant 2099. Out of all of those, I think I liked half of them. The other half I did not care for. I mean, it was basically hit and miss. Whenever you have a series of one-shots like that, they're not all going to be the same quality. And that was how it was here. Some of them were really good, and some of them I didn't think they were. Now here I've got the first volume of John Byrne's Fantastic Four. There are, I think, 11 of these volumes. There's the cover. And I have the whole run. And I'm in the middle of volume 2. And I just stopped reading it. It wasn't based on quality. I thought it was a solid book. I just got caught up doing other things. And now it's been several months and I still haven't finished volume 2. So I'm hoping if I ever do a revisited collection video here showing more of the miscellaneous books, I'm hoping that the next time I come to this area of the shelf that you will see several of John Byrne's Fantastic Four books here. I have them all, like I said, and I think this is a really great book. It starts off kind of slow. I think the first 2 or 3 issues I really did not like. After that, it really picks up the speed, and I think it's great. If you are looking for some solid Fantastic Four, you don't take my word for it. Everyone says that Byrne's run is really great. Speaking of the Fantastic Four, here we've got a comic that was just called Four. Wolf at the Gate. Or no, I can't read today. Wolf at the Door. And I really liked this book. It was just a solid Fantastic Four story where I will go ahead and... Wow, I pulled out another one. I'll have to put that one back later. And what happened here, I will go ahead and spoil the first issue. The Fantastic Four lose their home, and so they have to kind of figure out, their celebrities still, they have to figure out how to live as more ordinary Joes than what they're used to. And that is just a really neat concept, I think. It's not something you see a lot with the Fantastic Four. They are almost universally very famous, very wealthy, always kind of living at large in their headquarters. And I think that it's kind of neat to subvert that for a little bit and see what they would do if they have to go and live in a small apartment and figure out what they're going to do with their lives. And there is a series with this title, the Four Marvel Knights version, and I have one of the other books. I don't have the rest, but I do want to seek those out because I really enjoyed this book. This is the next book, DP7 Classic. This is from the New Universe, which was, if you're familiar with the Ultimate Universe, the New Universe was kind of sort of that, but in the 1980s. The difference was, instead of doing modern versions of the Marvel characters, the New Universe was a modern, more realistic superhero universe with brand new characters. And, for example, this was a series of comics with 7 characters. See, it was about the Displaced Paranormal 7. And these guys all came from a facility that kind of monitored these guys, and they went there willingly. It wasn't like the Weapon X program or anything like that. But then they realized that the guy in charge was corrupt, and hilarity ensues. Not really, but that was actually, in my opinion, the best of the New Universe stuff that I have read. And they put out a few of these trades. They've got, I have DP7 and Starbrand right here. There's Starbrand. But in my opinion, DP7 was the best. Starbrand here was about basically the Marvel Comics Green Lantern. Only the problem was, since this series was, you know, supposed to be a realistic series, the whole universe for that matter, the whole New Universe was supposed to be very realistic, they couldn't really do Green Lantern as a Marvel character to justice. It was kind of, you know, boring because he was stuck on Earth handling very mundane problems. He wasn't really doing the cool stuff that you get to see Green Lantern doing. And also, I just found this character, I don't even remember his name other than his superhero name, I just found the character himself to be very unlikable. And that to me, if they did like Starbrand Volume 2, I probably wouldn't bother picking it up. But what they did, I know there's another one, the Cyforce, which I read, I think, a couple of issues, and that was really tough to get through. But they haven't done anything other than Volume 1 of a few of the New Universe books. So, like, they haven't done DP7 Volume 2, which is a shame, because I would have bought DP7 Volume 2. Not so with Starbrand or Cyforce, but it is what it is. And then we've got Kurt Busiek's Spider-Man Untold Tales. I don't often read Spider-Man. As you can see, I don't have very many Spider-Man books on my shelf. But I do have this because it's just solid, fun superhero stories. It is, the premise here is that these issues are set in between the issues of the original 1960s. So, like, for example, I don't remember what the exact order is, but it might be Spider-Man issue 1, and then you could go and read Untold Tales issue 1, which Kurt Busiek, he's a very knowledgeable superhero fan. He knows a whole lot about continuity and what happens where, stuff like that. This is very good at happening in between the lines, if you will, behind the scenes, and dealing with stuff that was going on in the original series of Spider-Man comics while also telling new and exciting stories. Recently, and I say that, I mean like in the last few years, they put out an omnibus collecting the whole 25-something issues. Unfortunately, they do not have it in any other form. It's just this book, which collects 8 issues, and then the 25-issue omnibus, which is 50 or 60 bucks. And I wasn't really prepared to lay down that much money for the omnibus, although I really did enjoy this, and if I found the omnibus cheaper, I would buy it, but I just wasn't wanting to pay that much money for the omnibus, but I really did like this book here. So if you don't have this series, I would suggest reading it. I think it's very fun. And then we've got Supervillain Team Up, MODOK's 11. This is really fun. You can't really see a whole lot of the cover there, but I don't want this to come out like the others did. Basically, the premise here is that MODOK, he's the big giant head monster, he has put together a team of supervillains, and they are going to pull off a heist. And I don't want to spoil it, but there are a couple of traitors on the team, and it's very suspenseful, it's very fun. It's one of those books that deals with kind of what would the Marvel Universe really be like if you put in certain realistic things, I guess. I'm not doing a great job of describing it, but I really, really liked that miniseries. And I think if you are wondering what all should I read, what is something that I should read, this is a very good standalone book. It's just a miniseries by itself. It's not part of an ongoing. It's not very heavy on past stories, so if you're not familiar with the past stories, this is something that I would recommend you read. Chaos War. I hated this. This was a huge jumbled mess, and that is, I don't even want to get into it. I really hated this event. It was really indecipherable for me. I found out at the very end of the book there was quite a bit of extra features in the back. Apparently it was meant to be a conclusion of the Hercules series written by Greg Pak and Fred Van Lente. I had never read the Hercules series, so that to me is something they should have advertised a little more. Hey, if you're wanting the conclusion of that Hercules series, it's Chaos War. Instead, I bought it because I had an X-Men Chaos War tie-in, and I thought, well, I should read Chaos War before reading this tie-in, and I ended up really, really hating it. I'll just leave it at that. Young Avengers, Volumes 1 and 2. This is the original series. I don't have any of the other Young Avengers books except for the Civil War Runaways tie-in, and this series is phenomenal. It is just great modern superhero action, but it's also, it feels like a Marvel comic, and I'm very disappointed that this creative team did not stay on longer for this series, because what happened was, since this was very early 2000s, or it was closer to the mid 2000s. By the time they got a new creative team on this book to do new stories, I had stopped caring, and because they waited too long. When you wait 10 years to say, hey, what if we brought back that team? Even though people loved the original stories, that it wasn't that they just were unpopular, it's that Marvel couldn't get their act together. They thought they could wait for Alan Heinberg to do a volume 3, and then he never did. And basically, I just lost interest in this series, which is a shame because the first 2 volumes were really stunning. And, maybe someday I'll get the newer stories, but I kind of doubt it. I think it's too little too late. If they wanted me to read Young Avengers, they would have put out new stories far sooner than what they did. These 2 books are Avengers West Coast, which is maybe my favorite Avengers series, is the Avengers West Coast. I really love the, what do you call it, the underdog team, I guess. Not really underdog, but this team, for the most of its duration in the 80s, was more of a lesser-known team. The characters were not Thor and Captain America. They were the lesser-known Avengers, and specifically, these 2 books collect John Byrne's run on Avengers West Coast, which Byrne, I will buy just about anything he does, even though I really think he's a terrible human being, and these days I really feel like he's lost a lot of the magic that he had back then. But these books are, well, especially the first one, I think, is better than the second one, because he had some kind of falling out, so he left the story basically in the middle of the story. And so then you had Roy Thomas and his wife Dan had to come and clean up the story and try and finish it off. And so both of these books kind of feel a little disjointed, but I really enjoyed them for the most part. But they weren't great. There were some flaws there, but I really enjoy the West Coast Avengers, and I'm glad that Marvel is now putting out more volumes, collecting that whole series. I'm really going to be anxious to read that whole series once they put out. They've got 3 or 4 volumes in addition to these 2. I have one of them, but I'm hoping that they put out volumes to the end of the series. And we got just 3 more. Skrull Kill Crew. This is written by Grant Morrison and Mark Millar. I bet you didn't know that these 2 wrote something that you've never heard of. Well, you've maybe heard of it, but it's a very unknown, very low-key book, I guess. I didn't like it. And it's been years and years since I read this, but I did not really like it. These 2 guys are, they were teaming up a lot more in the 90s. They wrote Aztec, the Ultimate Man at DC. They both worked together for a couple of pitches at Marvel, doing various things, but they kind of had a falling out in the early 2000s. But honestly, what I've read of their collaborations, I really like Morrison's work almost all the time. Even when he does something like the Fantastic Four book I mentioned earlier, I will still buy what he does just to see what it's like. And Millar, I used to like him a lot more when I was, 13. I don't like his work nearly as much now, but you would think that those 2 guys would produce better work together, and they really didn't. But the premise here is basically that you've got these guys, they accidentally ate a Skrull who was shapeshifted into the form of a cow. And then they get these powers to detect Skrulls on planet Earth. And then they are going out and killing Skrulls. And it sounds like it's a fantastic premise, but really, I didn't like it. I thought it was very, didn't quite hit the mark. Maybe that's another one that I need to reread and see if it holds up or if it's better than I remembered. One of the last books, I'm not pulling it out any further, but it's Squadron Supreme, Hyperion versus Nighthawk. I've said before in previous videos that I am a sucker for a story that does an homage to characters from another company. For example, this is basically the Marvel version of Superman and Batman, only they are different. Batman here is a black guy who only cares about crimes committed against black people, and then Superman is more of a government tool than the actual Superman. But this book I did not like. It was very... I won't even get into it. And it's not even been that long since I read it, so I remember most of what I didn't like about it, but I don't want to get into it because it takes a while for me to explain what I hated. This is Aranya, Volume 1. The Heart of the Spider, I believe, is what this is called. And there are more books in this series, but I don't have them all. But I really liked this book. It was, you know, if you like old school Spider-Man from the 1960s, then you might like the Aranya Heart of the Spider. It was basically kind of repeating the formula that the old, you know, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and those guys, it was repeating the formula they used on Spider-Man, but just with a teenage girl in the 2000s. And I thought it was fantastic. It's another one. You may see a review or you may not. Depends on how soon I can get to review it, but I really liked it. And that is the end of this shelf. I've actually, since I started reviewing this shelf, I've actually added a few more books over here. I've started, this is the beginning of the third X-Men shelf. So eventually all of these miscellaneous books will be moved to another shelf. But I've finally finished talking about all of these, so the next time I will probably do the shelf beneath this one. Until then, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later.